YouTube can't smell you.
All right. Well, we are live. It looks like we're setting up the meeting to live stream. We'll just give it a couple more minutes to see this go. And it looks like here we are. Welcome, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Sean Waters. This is a continuing series in talking with people I'm fascinated to learn more about. We're happy to have Mark Szretter here today, who is a senior manager in business development from Extreme Event Analytics and in the Latin America and Caribbean market. And this interview is meant for people, entrepreneurs who are looking to make a difference in the world, who have something that they want, a product or service that has a chance of helping other people. This came about from my interest in Tad Hargraves' Marketing for Hippies on the truth of selling. And he says in that, I'll link that below once the interview goes live, that selling is not about closing the deal, but finding the truth about whether or not my service or our service is a good fit for where you are. So it's less about closing, just kind of messed up. If you think about consent and the ethical challenges, or that's not even the right word. Manipulation's bad. Manipulation is immoral. So when I mentioned this to Mark, and who's gone through the wisdom workshop, he lit up and was like, this is what I do. And so I guess I'm going to turn it over to you, Mark. What initially attracted you to your role in sales? And let's just start there.
Nice. No, thank you, Sean, for that introduction. And yeah, I do get excited about the notion of ethical sales, because I sort of presume that's yes. What I'm doing. And I wasn't sure that's what I was getting into when I started. In fact, what I was attracted to, this is good because it's honest. What I was attracted to initially was the chance to be challenged. I was joining a company that was very science oriented. And so the learning prospect alone, my firm looks at the risk of natural catastrophes, so floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, and sort of the chance to go back to graduate school, as it were, and do it professionally and potentially, sort of earn a salary and do so learning a new role as well, which sales was some 11 years ago. It was very exciting to me. So it was the prospect of learning all these new things. And really just hoping that it wasn't the creepy thing that I'd seen portrayed in movies, and hoping that, well, it's a technical enough solution. Perhaps it's just about explaining the technicalities of our solution to well-informed buyers who simply say, yeah, I want that. So I think initially it was travel. It was the excitement of learning. It was the chance to use some of my skills that I did bring uniquely to the role, which relates to my hobby interest, my very personal interest in foreign languages. So Spanish was required for the role, and I really was excited about a new professional role where I got to use my Spanish.
Muy bien.
Gracias. A partir de ahora en adelante vamos a hablar solamente en español. Para los que estén, sorry.
Pero hoy, por mí, probablemente es mejor en inglés, por
Perfecto.
favor.
Quedamos en inglés. Yeah, that was just kind of like an in-joke for any of the Spanish learners out there. Yeah, I was like joking around. From here on in, we're going to speak Spanish, but we'll save that for another interview.
Yeah. So how has your perspective on sales changed since then? I love that you have challenge and lifelong learning. I think that's probably why we're hanging out.
Yeah.
So how has it changed from that initial entry into sales to where you are now? And how you're 10 years in, 15 years in?
11 years in.
11 years in. How has it changed since then, from then to now?
So what hasn't changed is that lifelong learning. I think sales and business development in general, and there's sort of names that get interchanged, has in it, when practiced well, or when even endeavored to be practiced well, is very intellectually stimulating, very challenging, very complex. There's sort of a lot to be learned about the craft. And I think that's how my role has changed over the last, say, 5 years, particularly, which was I brought a new focus on sort of the craft and the practice of how do I create more value through the process of engaging with clients and prospects, new companies that we're talking to help them ferret out whether or not they really have problems indeed that we have adequate solutions for. So that's in a very short sentence, that's also sort of the new paradigm that I'm applying in my role in sales. I think back to the question of how it's changed. Initially, I thought what my job was simply to report and sort of explain to my clients or prospects everything about us.
Share
in
information.
order to engender trust. Sorry, I cut you off.
To share information.
To share information. I thought my role was merely here, let me be the verbal equivalent of our catalog.
Right.
And not to denigrate that, but to almost make sure. I thought one of my most important responsibilities was to memorize any and all details about our products. And I did that. We have extensive, for a given model that we have, say Mexico earthquake, we have 200 pages of documentation. So I would read that and commit many of the salient details to memory. And I was at the ready because we do have very technical buyers. So I thought my role was to be ready with all the answers about how precisely our products and services worked. And then now what I realize is that that's very me-centric. It's very focused on our company and our products and our solutions. And it's not trivial to say sales really can't be about that. It really should never be about us. I'm only present whilst there's potentially something for me to help you with. It's really the game, as it were, is for me to ferret out and go through a process with you, invite you into a process. And I think that's also related to how we got started on this topic, because you and I have been discussing dialogue and all the learning that can come from a very positive collaboration. Now I view my role as being that guide, that conversational guide, a subject matter expert, yes, but also, to borrow the words of another wise friend, a co-learner, because I do not know my client's business as well as they know their own business. So you have to bring a great deal of humility, as well as you have to put in your time to research where your products and services do potentially create value. So it's changed a good deal. I think, just overall, again, I focus more on how do I improve my own processes so that they're more efficient, so that every phone call I'm creating more value. That I think I was flying blindly for a few years, where I was still trying to create value, but it was much more, I think I did too much talking, not enough questioning and listening. And so that's really the new focus. And I think, and I know from the results, it's creating more value for our clients, and I'm making better matches, which is, I think, the whole game. So
it's so fascinating to me that this is one of the moves in education as well. We move from the sage on the stage, where I'm disseminating information to all of you. I, with the expert, will fill your minds with this information. And now we're the guide on the side. So we don't take the center stage. Students and their process takes the center stage. And instead of filling them with information, which is problematic in a lot of ways, not to mention colonial historical issues of power, we are now, being curious about how we can assist in their process wherever various students are. So I want to double click on this kind of listening and your process. What if you were going to speak to someone that might have a propensity for this kind of thing, or is exploring maybe a future career in sales, maybe even a past version of yourself, what kinds of things would you encourage that person to begin working on? What kinds of deliberate practices might they engage in?
I think that's a great question. I would begin, you need to, so say you're considering a new role. Yes, you do need to understand what product or service you're potentially bringing to someone else. I think much more important is to develop a practice where you have a framework of questions
Mm.
really that becomes your guide to the initial interactions, which in business speak, we like to call the discovery process, right? Where, and there's a framework that I think is best and richest, and it's called problem-centric selling. My favorite book on the subject is called Gap Selling by Keenan. I highly recommend that book. I've read, as I think I told you in the past, I've read probably 7 or 8 books on sales and business development, and that's by far my favorite model. So I would highly recommend that book and following that model. And it's particularly a better fit for, let me just say this. So for somebody considering a role in business development, you need to develop an awareness around product cycles, sales cycles. So there are products, let's say a Gillette razor, for which its use is evident, and you really just have 1 or 2 questions about it to quickly evaluate if it's the right fit for you as a consumer. In enterprise sales, there are many different people who are on the buying committee, as we would say, many stakeholders, each with their own unique needs, with their own perspective on the business or the organization's needs. You need to interview each and all of those folks and look for commonalities when you go sort of recycling those stories back to the organization you're speaking with. So I'd say if I had to put a label on, I would say you have to become a very good detective or a doctor diagnosing problems. So I would say first step, if ideally there's a product or service or a company or organization that you're thinking of joining, get to understand what problems they solve on behalf of their clients and do some deep thinking about it. Does that attract you? Do you think there's some nobility in it? Are you excited by that topic? I would also encourage anyone considering a role in this to choose it. I mean, this is good life advice, but right, any career you're considering, really choose it. Try not to fall into it. Now we've all taken jobs because we've needed employment. But I would say sales is an art that really deserves a lot of time to hone your skills, as does teaching or writing, or really many, well, perhaps all professions. But sales is one where there's evidently a number of reasons to be discouraged in the process, and it's complex and it's not linear. And there'd be reasons why many people, I think, give up on the profession. But if you have a core curiosity or drive, I would say it's good. Follow it, but it'll take time to grow in your skills.
That's really great and interesting to have a clear reason and a choice. That's not you're choosing it for a reason. I feel like that makes you a way more attractive candidate, that people are looking for that kind of long-term drive and longevity, right? It also connects to the hosting a good meeting and designing a good session, leading with a sense of purpose that sticks its neck out a little bit. That's a little bit controversial in a good kind of way. Now all of a sudden people are engaged. Like, I want to see where this goes, because I kind of agree with this and I'm kind of on board with this, but I need there's some buy-in there when I have a purpose that sticks its neck out a little bit. And that's from Priya Parker's The Art of Gathering for hosting things. So I like it. I want to zoom in on what it's like to be you a little bit more. And I'm wondering, this might sound bad. Is being likable important in your role? Because you strike me as a very likable person.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, yeah. My mother's always said I'm very likable. I hope that goes on the record. Look, yeah. I mean, I think it was one of the things that nudged me towards sales. I thought, it's about talking with people and enjoying being in others' presence and possibly being likable, but also liking to be with other people. So I think that conceding that was an initial attraction, like, oh, this is a profession where I get to talk to people, fun. I actually now have taken a new view on it, and I don't think it's important at all to be likable. It's one of the least important things. However, this brings me back to something I wanted to sort of tack on to the last bit about things I've learned, and is that you have to, sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
It's all right. It's all right.
But no, it's not really not important to be likable, but it is important to create value through your process. So, I've recalled what I wanted to say. It's okay to be attracted to wealth and consider getting into sales, because that is, I think, what some people find attractive is compensation, is that challenge and the reward. But I would say, it's funny, I don't think to be good at your job that it's sufficient to be interested in those remunerative rewards. I think if you're interested in your job, I guarantee you those rewards will come. That comes from like a seriousness about your craft. But I think I've seen it be insufficient, and I think it's insufficient. I think there's also something I think is core now to a positive and productive sales conversation, which is trust and integrity. And if I'm truly oriented towards your benefit as my client, well, there's something totally incompatible with that. If I'm looking to just close the deal, or if I'm looking to like make my quarter. And very fortunate, I work for an organization with a great deal of integrity, which is in it for the long run. You know, there's encouragement certainly to close any opportunities that are meant to close, you know, that naturally will close, but there isn't undue pressure to close deals that maybe shouldn't close, or maybe should take more time. So yeah, back to being likable. Yeah.
Well, there's a nice connection here. If I'm doing it to be liked, or I'm doing it to close the sale, both of those things are actually taking the focus on my investigation about whether or not this is good for you. And when people get a sense of like, wait a minute, are you just getting interested in me because you want something from me?
This is precisely it. Yeah. And I would say, as people are considering different frameworks to use in their business development or their sales work, sniff that out, because there are many models which are very much about you. There's one called BANT, which sort of is a framework saying, hey, before you qualify any opportunity, demand from your interlocutor that they tell you about their budget and whether or not they have authority to make a decision on this purchase. Well, it's very oriented. That's about you. That's not interested in their outcomes at all. I would say, really, those are not the strongest frameworks. I don't want to name too many names of bad frameworks, but I would say if you get the sense, hey, this is starting to feel a little slimy, it's probably because it is. And it's probably because it's old school sales technique. There are all these manipulative sales closing techniques. Avoid them like the plague. They have no role in enterprise sales or really any sort of good,
particularly smaller entrepreneurs like me, where if I'm primarily working to build relationships, it doesn't do any good for me those aren't the clients that I want anyway, because they're not going to be able to refer or build the kind of community that the platform hopefully develops into. So that seems like it's also just like, what kind of a person do I want to be? Like, welcome to the Wisdom Workshop, where I'll teach you some manipulative techniques to get what you want. That sounds terrible.
Right.
I really appreciate that. So I'm not focused on being liked. I'm not focused on making the sale. I am focused on the other and the unique perspective, position, problem that the other is having that I may or may not be able to help them solve with my product or service. Is that fair?
That's a good thread that you've tied together there. I think that's absolutely true. Right. Both the likability and the other aspects are, you want to avoid them when it's about you. You really need to make the focus on your client.
And now you're focusing on how you can bring that focus to all of the interactions that you have, to the email that you send, to the phone call that you make. It becomes more of this detective working, information gathering in a kind and considerate way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's a, not to confuse a sales discovery conversation with a social conversation. So I will offer that caveat. Like I like people and I like simply talking with people. But I am more efficient in my business development conversations because it really needs to be oriented towards their outcomes. And as much as I might enjoy the conversation personally, there's only so much time that really should be. I mean, I work with Latin Americans. There's always the first 5 minutes of every phone call, which really needs to be about family and what's going on with you personally. And but it's also really important to transition to the questions which are going to allow you to create value, even if it's just at the very end. I'm reflecting back that you have needs that are different from the ones we solve. And here I buttoned up an interaction where you can walk away at least enjoying the benefit of some new information. An expert in offering these solutions has confirmed not really a good fit, not for you, saved you from spending money on a solution you didn't need to spend, and spending all of the time, which is even more costly often.
That's so good. And I'm writing down enjoying the benefit of new information, because that is something that you can provide to someone, even if it's not you. And that again builds trust, so that they associate this conversation, they're more likely to get the phone, so on and so forth, I'm imagining.
Yeah, you get referrals. I mean, if you create value through the process, it may not be a good fit today. People move around industries and they remember positive, productive conversations with professionals that they esteem. That you get callbacks.
Is this part of how you? Is another thing I wanted to ask you is about hearing no, or the recurrence of no thank you. How do you handle the no's that you get?
I mean, no's can be disappointing. You're a human being. If you particularly if you thought something was like lining up and you thought, no, this is going to work and this is great. And there have been cases where an organization, I really felt like our product or solution was going to create a lot of value for them if we help them move forward. And then they said no. That can be hard, particularly when there's not good clarity, and a lot of sort of potential deals die in the complexity of our modern enterprise. You have 10, 11 different decision makers or influencers, and usually it just takes one person's internal no at your client to squash a potential opportunity, and yet one is never sufficient for helping an organization move forward. Change is hard, so it really requires a lot of work. So I don't want to pretend, this is all preface to say, I don't want to pretend like I'm never disappointed at no's, but I have a new perspective on no. And it's that no's are incredibly useful because probably, as all professionals feel today, we don't have enough time in the week to do the things we'd like to do. And no's offer a lot of clarity. What I dislike much more is when there's ambiguity, when things remain in process and when there's no visibility. You have to be a little bit bold in asking for access to people to just talk to them and get clarity around that. But a no can often be very helpful, because then you can map out at least why people think it's a not good fit. Not to change them or manipulate them or convince them otherwise, but you have to know where you're at. I mean, ideally, you can get to an honest place at the end of a process where you can say, well, we did hear this no and these doubts. And what we're also hearing, nevertheless, is these problems are quite costly. So how are you guys thinking about the need or the prioritization to solve these or sort these problems out? So that's where you hope to get to. But no's aren't bad. No's you have to embrace as part of the process.
I love that. And it also, if you are gaining information and focus on the craft rather than the outcome, it allows you that information feeds into the craft. So it's that radio silence where you're like, I don't know what to do with this lack of communication. Do you get ghosted very often in this? Do people just not all of a sudden don't pick up the phone?
I don't think it's like personal. It's never personal. Yeah. I mean, like, I think it's just, you have to think empathetically. Everybody is just only living in their own world.
That's right.
and it is information. If you do, it's my least favorite is when a client or someone goes a bit radio silent. But it's feedback. It's feedback that they have other priorities which are more pressing. And you have to take that into account. It's okay to reping and say, hey, this was, 2 weeks ago, this was the hottest priority problem you guys are facing. Has something changed? I think it's okay to, if you're being sort of sincere in your own process, it's okay to double back and ask. But a lot of times, things change, priorities change for all corporations, for all organizations. So sometimes it's just the truth that it was a priority 2 weeks ago and it's no longer. They got a bad quarterly earnings report and now the focus is somewhere else.
So I'm really interested in this discovery phase. That word is fantastic, and how you do that. So I wonder if we could double click a little bit on that. And you also previously said that I'm almost like working like a detective or a doctor diagnosing something. So I'm like maybe running some diagnostic tests or something. I'm wondering if there's some like superpowers that you have in the discovery / diagnostic phase. Some way of looking at that you're currently working on.
Well, it's funny. My superpower is having landed just thanks to no talent of my own, on a very good framework. So that's the problem. I misspoke. That's the problem-centric selling framework that you'll find in the Gap Selling book by Keenan, or check out his content online. He's spoken at a few conferences and he outlines it pretty clearly there. I think that's my superpower, which is taking that approach to discovery. He offers a few helpful analogies, which I might borrow. But like a detective or like a good doctor, look, I think it's also easier to describe what I was doing badly before. I could just say, look, I would show up and just sort of assume that you knew what you wanted. And I would show you all of my products and wares, a little bit like those vendors in Times Square in New York City that would open up their jacket and just display 20 watches. Like if you need a watch and what kind of watch you like, well, then you just point at the watch. Like that's sort of like easy matchmaking. I thought it was a little bit I wasn't selling watches on the street, but the enterprise sales equivalent of, your problems, you kind of know what you want and need, don't you? Let me just show you everything we have, like at a holiday bazaar or the flea market. Then you'll pick out the thing that matches best, and I'll just help you along and I can help you write a contract and I don't know.
And this is the product centric.
This is the product centric
so
selling. Exactly.
I'm showing you all of our shiny products,
all of our wares, and you have all the knowledge about your products. And whether or not it's a good match in the product centric selling, I don't take any responsibility. I give that all to you. You figure it out. I'm going to show you all my products. You figure out if any are a good match and how you're going to use it. There's a reason a lot of people do a product-centric selling. It's because it's easier. It's less work for the salesperson. It's not necessarily more effective, and it certainly doesn't create value in the process, but it's easier. So I was doing a lot of that. And what I like about the Gap Selling process is that Keenan highlights that instead of the client having all the knowledge of the problems, your job is to download all that knowledge of their problems, of their business challenges and technical challenges that they're experiencing today. So the discovery process is really an interview process whereby you establish what the status quo is, what's going on today, what's the present state. You evaluate the challenges that now this is not, I'm not talking to them about their challenges in managing accounts payable software, because that has nothing to do with the solutions that I have to offer. So they're focus questions. A part of your preparation for a discovery call is thinking about the organization you're talking to and doing a draft of, well, I know this is a reinsurance company. They deal in large aggregations of risk across large geographies. Present market conditions means that prices are going up with the the price of retrocession. So their own cost of risk transfer is increasing. This being the case, it's all the more important and costly when they don't have insight as to where the losses will come from. And if they cannot explain that to their other business partners, that can cost them millions of dollars. So there's a problem there I'm familiar with that relates to this type of company. So my questions relate to uncovering whether or not they have those problems. And it's also tailored to who I'm talking to. If I'm speaking to an underwriter, there's a certain sort of group of questions, based on their world and what their day-to-day function looks like. If I'm speaking to an actuarial lead or a cat modeling lead, it's different based. If I'm speaking to a CEO or CFO, it's tailored to the way they see the world or what they're asked to solve on behalf of their company. And
this is why it's more difficult than product centered, because now instead of going and using the same pitch of the which watch would you like, you are first actually understanding as much about someone's complex world,
right,
which is going to be different from X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, all of that.
Right. So, I mean, it's funny to apply to consumer products, but I think it nevertheless holds. So if somebody, is considering a watch, you'd want to understand how often do they presently use a watch? What do they like you to use the watch for? What's their athletic routine like? When do they wear a watch? Is it only when they're out at business meetings, or is it just an everyday thing because they really like to have the time? What do you use presently for alarms to wake up? It would be getting to know their world.
Yep.
So that then when you make a recommendation, it's not me making a recommendation based on anything I brought to the table. It's, well, hey, John, you've described liking to use a watch that's very sturdy because you use it all the time. You don't need a fancy watch. You've described taking up running 2 years ago and liking using a kind of a plain watch in your business meetings because you don't want to come off as uber fancy, because that's the vibe you're going for. Well, great. I'm going to recommend a Garmin running watch. So it's based on everything you've told me and not on, hey, I like Piaget XYZ and you should have this thing.
You're also only giving them the information that they need, right? They don't need to see your entire catalog of watches. They need to know the one or two, maybe three that are a good fit for them that they can choose from based on their needs and their budget potentially.
That's absolutely, incidentally, it's a really good principle to apply in general, which is don't include anything in the solution that isn't directly solving a problem your client has or is aware they have. Like, don't throw in extras. Don't be like, yeah, you're probably going to use this down the road. Why? There's no value to it. The client doesn't want it, need it, certainly doesn't want to pay for it. Don't include those things. That wasn't a part of the sale. If there's a good, healthy process and rapport, then there'll be opportunities down the line. And moreover, you know what clients really resent? Discovering that they've paid all this money for things they don't use. So who does that benefit? There's a chance it only benefits you. And that's definitely not what you want to establish, particularly if you want to create these long-term client relationships.
So, I mean, this totally connects with invitational rhetoric in terms of the rhetorical field. It's less about convincing someone. It's not like, I'm going to persuade you of this and stay tuned. Here's my reasons. By the end of my reasons, my ethical, logical, and emotional appeals, you will be convinced. It's completely a switch. I'm not trying to persuade or convince. I'm trying to listen and understand. And then from that basis of listening and understanding, I'll be in a better position to ask better questions to see which and how I might have something or my company has something that can actually provide value, help and serve you.
Yeah. I think that is exactly, you restated the model very nicely. I think of it as in a former life, I was a management consultant on technical projects for large companies and governments. And when I think I had a lower level, very technical role, but when I think about what the principals on a project would try and do, they would interview a company and understand as much as they could about the problem they were endeavoring to solve. Consultants would never just show up and begin proffering solutions. I mean, 90% of the consulting work from the business development stage and throughout the project is understanding, seeking information and data to understand the problem. Right. And then there's like the one meeting at the end where the consulting company presents solutions and recommendations. And maybe they're also engaged to sort of implement some of the solutions. But, you know, the Pareto 80-20, the 80% of the work is understanding the problems. So I think, like, you know, you can't just show up and start recommending solutions because it sort of ignores the individuality of a given organization or client, company, and the individuals you're working with. So it comes off as tone deaf, and you can, it's like guessing, you know, how are you going to guess the correct solution for that client? It doesn't create any value.
This just makes so much sense, and it's so nice. I mean, it seems like it requires patience and listening and understanding and kind of curiosity. And you strike me as a curious person, and being interested in others. The only other thing, there's a couple, maybe one bigger question, then we'll start doing some rapid fire ones. You work in a Latin America market, and you mentioned a little bit about cultural understanding. Do you think cultural literacy, how does that, I'm imagining that might be different from company to company as well. Do you see cultural fluency being a part of what you're doing, or?
Yeah, I think, yes, absolutely. I think, however, I would say the general skills that you bring to, say, a business development role, a selling role, are more important than your particular knowledge of any one culture or community. However, I would say that since, you know, in business development, you can only work with and through people to learn the information you require in order to make productive recommendations. You should be somebody who's curious about other people and, you know, ask questions about who they are and where they're from and how they operate. I mean, you should ideally have some curiosity about that. You don't have to bring the foreknowledge. I think of this, you mentioned superpowers before. I think this is one of my sort of quiet superpowers that I just bring because I am really curious about people from all around the world and other languages and other cultures and how they operate. And I think that was something that permitted me to, and permits me to, build relationships both inside my company and with, you know, clients, which is like a pretty pretty strong internal sort of attraction to learning about how others see the world and how they experience it. So I think that helps. Stephen Covey wrote, you know, the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the only concept, poor Stephen Covey, I can only remember one thing from his book, but I love, he had this concept of the speed of trust, which is that through the building of good relationships, so taking time to join someone for lunch, it shouldn't be done in the what I'm acquiring sort of fashion. It's not like I'm doing this to get something, but if it's sort of like go slow to go fast. So spend the time with people, get to know your colleagues. They're fascinating people. Just ask them some questions. Where are they from? What was it like to experience what they've experienced in their lives? That creates a real human connection. And then inevitably in your role, whatever your role is, sales or not, you will need information you don't possess. You will need to learn things you don't already know. Guess how you're going to learn them? Through other people. So yeah, I think I deem it like a superpower because you're just not some unknown entity just saying, hey, please get me the XYZ report. It's like, hey, John, can I talk to you to better understand how we build a damage function for tall cement buildings, because I have a client who wants to understand it and I realize I don't understand it. Could we do that over coffee? Sure, Mark, who I've had lunch with and who I know as a person. The answer is always, tends to be like, I'm going to drop things to attend to my friend. It's my friend who needs assistance. So I don't do it in a manipulative way, but it sort of speaks to the importance of spending time in person if you can, if you have that opportunity. Many of us now are working remotely. I'm working a lot remotely, but when I can, I'm spending time in the office. It's because those connections still matter.
I love that. And it's kind of a nice place to cap the whole thing here, is it really is a human. It seems like not only gap centric in terms of problem centric of what problems are there, it's also human centric in terms of how you go about it, it seems. I'm curious, are there other resources that you recommend for people who might want to go deeper on this?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. So I've mentioned before, Gap Selling by Keenan. Don't hesitate, go out and buy it. It's he's a unique entity. He's got his own style and flash.
One word name.
Yeah, his full name is Jim Keenan, and his earlier book called Not Taught, I think, is also valuable. On that book, the author's name is Jim Keenan, but he goes by Keenan now. He's known, I think, and well respected in the sort of sales and sales consulting world. He's got the best framework for my money. It's all about problem-centric selling. So go run out and buy it. I think it's worth its weight in gold. He also is offering trainings online, what have you. I've taken a few of those. I think they're very, very valuable. There's a podcast called the salesman.org podcast. A guy named Will Barron, I think, is very good. And he's like an aggregator. So he has a podcast in which he interviews sales framework authors and experienced sales people. And he sort of dives into process. I think his podcast is very good. There's another one called Sales Questions. I think Brutally Answered Sales Questions by Brian Burns. Also a very good podcast, I think, particularly if you're just getting into it. Brian Burns's content's very accessible, and it's okay to come to it as a newbie. And then my favorite book on negotiation is Getting More by Stuart Diamond. I think it's pretty good. I think it's even better, more useful in some senses than the very popular Never Split the Difference. I love that book too, but as an expert in sales said, that book's kind of oriented to how do you negotiate with terrorists. And a sales guru I really respect said, don't treat your clients like terrorists. This is not an antagonistic situation. So it doesn't always apply, in my humble opinion. So, people may see otherwise. I think they get good value out of those books.
Cool.
And then people can find me on LinkedIn if they want to just reach out and ask, for you're thinking about getting into sales, business development. Yeah, I'd be happy to have a conversation with anybody, particularly if you're in Sean Waters' orbits. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Well, this has been a really nice one, and I'm glad to have had the time to be able to talk with you about this. And if more questions come up, maybe we'll do a part 2, and maybe we get to talk about salsa dancing. I know you salsa dance. Yes, I do. That's not as often as I used to, but I still love it. Yeah, salsa dancing. Yeah, I'm happy to be a resource to people interested in salsa dancing or business development. Yeah, awesome. Reach out with questions. Mark. We'll put the links down below, and thanks if you found this valuable. Definitely leave us a comment, subscribe to the channel. Hopefully have more kind, intelligent, curious people on. It's been really fun to get to hang out with you. No, thanks, Sean, for the conversation. It was enjoyable. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it, and we'll chat soon. Okay. See ya. Ciao.